go.
Slavery. Nowhere have intellectuals seen racial issues as issues about intertemporal abstractions more so than in discussions of slavery. Moreover, few facts of history have been so distorted by highly selective filtering as has the history of slavery. To many people today, slavery means white people holding black people in bondage. The vast millions of people around the world who were neither white nor black, but who were either slaves or enslavers for centuries, fade out of this vision of slavery as if they had never existed, even though they may well have outnumbered both blacks and whites. It has been estimated that there were more slaves in India than in the entire Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
China, during the era of slavery, has been described as one of the largest and most comprehensive markets for the exchange of human beings in the world.
I believe that. I'm not going to say why I believe that it was some slavery in China, but they just, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything that'd be disrespectful. Listen, I just believe it. I believe it.
The largest and most comprehensive markets for the exchange of human beings in the world. Slaves were a majority of the population in some of the cities in Southeast Asia. At some period or other in history, as John Stuart Mill pointed out, almost every people now civilized have consisted, in majority, of slaves. When Abraham Lincoln said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong," he was expressing an idea peculiar to Western civilization at that time, and by no means universally accepted throughout Western civilization. What seems almost incomprehensible today is that there was no serious challenge to the moral legitimacy of slavery prior to the 18th century.
Are those white men on the block? There's white men on the block, on the slavery block. Okay, where's this? Where they at? Wow. Hey, if y'all like this this type of reaction, this type of content, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell so the next time we post a video, you'd be first to be notified. Okay, let's get into it.
This challenge to the moral legitimacy of slavery prior to the 18th century. Christian monasteries in Europe and Buddhist monasteries in Asia both had slaves. Even Thomas More's fictional ideal society, Utopia, had slaves.
Said Buddhists had slaves.
Although intellectuals today may condemn slavery as a historic evil of our society, what was peculiar about Western society was not that it had slaves, like other societies around the world, but that it was the first civilization to turn against slavery, and that it spent more than a century destroying slavery, not only within Western civilization itself, but also in other countries around the world, over the often bitter and sometimes armed resistance of people in other societies. Only the overwhelming military power of Western nations during the age of imperialism made this possible. Slavery did not quietly die out of its own accord. It went down fighting to the bitter end in countries around the world, and it has still not totally died out to this day in parts of the Middle East and Africa. It is the image of racial slavery, white people enslaving black people, that has been indelibly burned into the consciousness of both black and white Americans today.
That's Toby from Roots. Well, Kunta Kinte is what they call him. But that's Toby right there. Okay. Wow. Okay, this makes sense. And the fact that that slavery is still alive and well in many places, that sickens me, man. That sickens me. But then when you look at the when you look at the whole sex trade, like little girls going missing all the time, that's slavery too. So yeah,
by the intelligentsia, and not simply as a fact about the past, but as a causal factor used to explain much of the present, and an enduring moral condemnation of the enslaving race. Yet two crucial facts have been filtered out of this picture. One, the institution of slavery was not based on race, and two, whites as well as blacks were enslaved. The very word slave is derived from the name of a European people, Slavs, who were enslaved for centuries before the first African was brought in bondage to the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
It was not only in English that the word for slave derived from the word for Slav. The same was true in various other European languages and in Arabic.
So this is the type of education I'm getting from checking out Thomas Sowell. Why again do people not want me to react to him? I don't get that part. That's the part I don't get. Is it because they're covering these people in a cloak of I don't know, being against the people or something like that? I don't get that. I'm trying to figure that part out, because a lot of people are protesting in many different ways from me reacting to this guy, along with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. So yeah, probably shouldn't put them in the same boat, but they put them in the same boat. And like, okay, here you go again.
The same was true in various other European languages and in Arabic. For most of the history of slavery, which covers most of the history of the human race, most slaves were not racially different from those who enslaved them. Not only did Europeans enslave Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, Polynesians enslaved other Polynesians.
What the heck? Polynesians? My favorite sauce? Let me tell you something. When you go to Chick-fil-A, man, and you try that Polynesian sauce, oh yeah, you want to dip like a chicken nugget into that bad boy, chicken tender, or the chicken sandwich. I prefer the spicy chicken deluxe, with the pepper jack cheese. Ooh, get you some Polynesian sauce, dip that bad boy in there, and then make sure that it don't drizzle on the floor. Ooh. The Polynesians was enslaving their people. God dang, man. Now I feel some type of way. What is he about to do with that daggone hammer? Is he about to bust him in the head with it? Oh, my God.
Africans enslaved other Africans, Polynesians enslaved other Polynesians, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Moreover, after it became both technologically and economically feasible to transport masses of slaves from one continent to another, that is, to have a whole population of slaves of a different race, Europeans as well as Africans were enslaved and transported from their native lands to bondage on another continent. Pirates alone transported 1 million Europeans as slaves to the Barbary coast of North Africa.
Wow.
At least twice as many European slaves as there were African slaves transported to the United States and to the 13 colonies from which it was formed. Moreover, white slaves were still being bought and sold in the Islamic world decades after blacks had been freed in the United States.
What? They said, nah, we keeping this party going, Jack. This is free labor right here. I don't care what they doing over there in the Americas. Y'all gonna get y'all butts out there on that track and do what y'all supposed to do. Sheesh. This is sad, man. It's sad that we use people like resources. I mean, we use people like just like animals just to do a job, and we're saying we're not paying you, and if you don't do it, we're gonna do something bad to you or somebody in your family.
What marked the modern era of slavery in the West was the fact that, as distinguished historian Daniel Boorstin pointed out, now, for the first time in Western history, the status of slave coincided with the difference of race. But to claim that race or racism was the basis of slavery is to cite as a cause something that happened thousands of years after its supposed effect. As for the legacy of slavery in the world of today, that is something well worth investigating, as distinguished from simply making sweeping assumptions. Too many assumptions that have been made about the effects of slavery on both blacks and whites will not stand up under scrutiny. Back during the era of slavery in the United States, such prominent writers as the French visitor and observer Alexis de Tocqueville, Northern traveler in the antebellum South, Frederick Law Olmsted, and prominent Southern writer Hinton Helper all pointed to striking differences between the North and the South, and attributed the deficiencies of the southern region to the effects of slavery on the white population of the South. These differences between northern and southern whites were not merely perceptions or stereotypes, they were factual.
I like that right there. As a whole, no matter what the case, slavery as a whole is disgusting. Absolutely. Regardless of who enslaved who was the slaves, slavery as a whole was disgusting. Horrible. Absolutely freaking horrible. I'm trying not to cuss, man, but it's ridiculous how we do each other when we need something and we deem somebody so unimportant that we say, okay, I guess it's you. It's not like they played rock, paper, scissors, or they try to see who had the smallest straw or anything like that. It's like, so I guess it was classism. I guess it was not necessarily always classism, just about who was willing to be a part of the team, a part of the bully crew, the bully mob. Because then people do that, and like extortion still happens. It happens in freaking elementary school, where you can bully somebody to do something for you, take advantage of them. It's not right, man.
Slavery on the white population of the South. These differences between northern and southern whites were not merely perceptions or stereotypes, they were factually demonstrable in areas ranging from literacy rates to rates of unwed motherhood, as well as in attitudes toward work and violence. But attributing these differences to slavery ignored the fact that the ancestors of white Southerners differed in these same ways from the ancestors of white Northerners, when they both lived in different parts of Britain and when neither had ever seen a black slave. Does the moral enormity of slavery give it any more decisive causal weight in explaining the situation of blacks today than it did in explaining that of whites in the antebellum South? There is no a priori answer to that question, which must be examined empirically, like many other questions. The fact that so many black families today consist of women with fatherless children has been said by many to be a legacy of slavery. Yet most black children grew up in two-parent families, even under slavery itself, and for generations thereafter. As recently as 1960, 2/3 of black children were still living in two-parent families. A century ago, a slightly higher percentage of blacks were married than were whites. In some years, a slightly higher percentage of blacks were in the labor force than were whites. The reasons for changes for the worse in these and other patterns must be sought in our own times. Whatever the reasons for the disintegration of the black family, it escalated to the current disastrous level well over a century after the end of slavery, though less than a generation after a large expansion of the welfare state and its accompanying non-judgmental ideology. To say that slavery will not bear the full weight of responsibility for all subsequent social problems among black Americans is not to say that it had negligible consequences among either blacks or whites, or that its consequences ended when slavery itself ended. But this is only to say that answers to questions about either slavery or race must be sought in facts, not in assumptions or visions, and certainly not in attempts to reduce questions of causation to only those which provide moral melodramas and an opportunity for the intelligentsia to be on the side of the angels.
Did they teach this in your schools? That's what I want to know. Because they didn't teach it in the schools I was in. Did not focus on that at all. I want to know if they taught this in your schools. You know what? I take that back. I said that so, like as if I knew what I was talking about. Because even if they was teaching that, I wasn't in the business of trying to learn things if I didn't feel like it. So, but this particular subject right here, I didn't. This right here, all the information that they're sharing right here. Yeah. This is very interesting. Extremely interesting.
Dramas and an opportunity for the intelligentsia to be on the side of the angels. Just as Western Europeans in post-Roman times benefited from the fact that their ancestors had been conquered by the Romans, with all the brutality and oppression that entailed, blacks in America today have a far higher standard of living than most Africans in Africa as a result of their ancestors being enslaved, with all the injustices and abuses that entailed. There is no question that both conquest and enslavement were traumatic experiences for those on whom they were inflicted, nor is either morally justified by whatever benefits might come of this to subsequent generations of their offspring.
Don't you know how y'all have stories of your grandparents going to war, fighting in the military and all these other things, and they told you all of these, you know, not necessarily grandiose stories about, you know, the history of your family and whatnot. Um, well, that's the same thing that's being passed down from generation to generation in the black household. So we also are reminded of a time of our great grand parents going through what they went through when it was okay for a mob of white men to lynch a black man in public. And all those things came from a time when it was legal for them to enslave a people and oppress a whole group of people before the laws start turning in the favor of the African American, and they can actually do something without being concerned in most parts of the country without being lynched. So, um, although this information, if it got out, if a lot of people care to look at it, especially black people, because I think that's why this was posted, just to let black people know that you wasn't the first, nor were you the only people that was enslaved. That's cool, and that's that information. I receive it, and I'm appreciative of all the new knowledge that I received from this video. That still does not take away from the pain that we hear and see time and time again when we look back over our lives, and we even look at some of our heroes who never lifted a hand to be angry or dangerous or any of that to the opposite race, which is the white race, like Dr. Martin Luther King, and what he had to go through, and what everybody who stood arm in arm with him had to go through, with the dogs and the water hoses and the billy clubs and all of those things. So again, this information right here is extremely informative, and I appreciate it. But you do have to understand that the anger is still there because it wasn't too long ago that injustices were happening seemingly against one race in this country. So it's like y'all got it good. Y'all living way better than Africans in Africa right now whose people were also enslaved. And plus, you were enslaved by black man first. Black men sold you to the country anyway, so you can't blame. It's not always about who enslaved you, and that if you look a certain type of color, you should be held responsible for enslaving a whole group of people. Sometimes it's about the trauma that's still being dealt with by an entire community of people because of what happened not too long ago. And in some instances, it's still happening as long as certain people are covered under certain laws and protections, and they're backed with by people who have some power and who have a bigger voice, and then things get swept under the rug and justice is never served. So again, this is really good information, but I do want you to understand that by simply putting this information out there, it doesn't settle the cost, because there's a bunch of angry people out there. And I'm talking about there's angry people on every single side, and I'm sure everybody have their story. But the only story that I can speak up on is my own. All right? So yeah, This was very interesting, man.
But history cannot be undone, nor does conceiving of races as intertemporal abstractions have any such track record as to make it look like a promising approach to the present or the future.
This guy's smart as hell, man. This guy's smart. He's super intelligent. I want to hear what y'all got to say about this in the comments below. And if you have yet to hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so on your way out the door. Once again, guys, I am Van, and now we are all the LFR family. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video, hopefully inside the Patreon as well. Y'all have been amazing. Love y'all.